Hey everybody, what's up? So this is going to be my review of Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith. And just like my reviews for Episodes 1 and 2, I will be going over first a brief summary of the plot, and then I'll give you my pros and cons, and then my conclusion. Alright, so let's get started. So, Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith picks up 3 years after the events of Attack of the Clones, during which time the Clone Wars have been going on between the Separatists and the Republic and the Jedi and the Sith, all of which is explained in the 2008 to 2014 Clone Wars show, the 3D version, even though the 2D version from 2003 kind of touches on some of the same stuff, but the one from 2003 ends right before Revenge of the Sith. But when this movie starts, the Clone Wars are nearing an end, and Obi-Wan and Anakin go off on a mission to save Palpatine from General Grievous, who is a big character in both versions of the Clone Wars. He's basically the leader of the droid army, and he's a half-alien, half-cyborg character. And after Obi-Wan and Anakin rescue Palpatine, they get back to Coruscant. Anakin gets promoted to be a member of the Jedi Council, while Obi-Wan has to go off to another planet to look for General Grievous, while at the same time Anakin is slowly seduced to the dark side by Palpatine. And I gotta tell you, after rewatching this, my god, did I forget how good it was. In fact, it used to be my favorite of the saga before I was on the prequel hate bandwagon, and then Empire Strikes Back became my favorite of the saga. But after rewatching this has replaced Force Awakens as my fourth favorite Star Wars movie. Seriously, that's how good it is, after you rewatch it. Because this is probably one of the most important films in the saga because it sets up everything that comes in the original trilogy and arguably, yes, the sequel trilogy as well. Not to mention, this movie has so many emotional and dramatic moments that just gave me so many feels, just like, But anyway, before I go off on a tangent of how good it is, let's just cover my pros and cons first. Okay, so my biggest pro for Revenge of the Sith is easily its overall tone and story. Mainly because, as a whole, it feels a lot darker and more dramatic than Episodes 1 and 2. And as a whole, feels very different than Episodes 1 and 2. And, dare I say, has way more effort put into it. And I think the main reason for that is because, obviously, it's the final film before the original trilogy, so obviously it has to tie up the loose ends of the prequels and set in motion everything that comes in the original trilogy, so that's sort of its main focus. But at the same time, it works on its own as its own individual movie, similar to The Last Jedi, how it, does its own thing while at the same time sets up the events for Episode 9 and continues the events of 7. And my second biggest pro with Revenge of the Sith is the overall plot being much easier to follow than the plots of Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. Even though, to be fair, you kind of know what's going to happen in the plot. Because this is the final film of the prequel trilogy, it's not going to have a happy ending, because everything is just going to go bad by the end. But it's interesting to see the lead up and just build up to all that, bad stuff happening, just the setup for, Order 66 and Anakin turning, all that build-up is really, really good to see. And, it takes its time, this movie definitely takes its time with the setup and build-up for everything that's going to happen by the end of it, and everything that happens in the original trilogy. And in case you're wondering, do I think this is the most memeable Star Wars movie? Yes. Because at this point, pretty much every scene in it is a meme. And they're all just freaking fantastic. The originals and sequels don't even come close to the amount of memes that the prequels, especially Episode 3, have. And actually, there were quite a few things in this movie that surprised me upon rewatching it. Surprised me that I made them pros as opposed to cons. Probably the biggest was Hayden Christensen as Anakin. He gives such a better performance in this movie than he did in Attack of the Clones, because this movie is basically his story. His turn to the dark side is probably the biggest focus of it, and I love how like him being manipulated by Palpatine is one of the biggest and most important parts of the story, and how Palpatine slowly but surely starts to plant those seeds of doubt in Anakin's head about, like, the Jedi and, their ideals and morals, as well as really, is there a difference between the Jedi and the Sith, and, Anakin's inner conflict about his loyalty to the Jedi, as well as his personal life and his feelings. I love how Palpatine slowly but surely starts to exploit that, because it makes him an effective manipulator. Because, like, throughout the course of the trilogy, we see him do that. We see him exploit the weaknesses of his victims, and that's how they're so easy for him to manipulate. Especially in the iconic opera scene between Palpatine and Anakin at the beginning of the movie. My God, that scene is so good, because it's subtle foreshadowing, it's has great dialogue and editing, and story-wise is super important, because you really start to see the reason why Anakin and Palpatine grow so much closer in this movie. And that's not just because, obviously, Palpatine was manipulating him, but he manipulates him effectively because he sort of, like, listens and sympathizes with Anakin's inner struggles and problems. Like, he becomes almost a father figure to Anakin in this movie, more so than Obi-Wan, which is one of the reasons why Anakin starts to grow, more attached to Palpatine, because he goes to him for answers and guidance, and, tells him about his problems, things that he wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable sharing with Obi-Wan. And that's one of the best examples of how Anakin and Obi-Wan's relationship kind of starts to fall apart in this movie, is because, like, because of all this inner conflict that's going on inside Anakin between his duty as a Jedi and his personal life, and his fear of losing Padme because of how he lost his mother. All of that is just, one of the reasons why he, starts to gravitate to Palpatine more than Obi-Wan. That's kind of the contrast between how Palpatine and Obi-Wan, portray themselves as father figures to Anakin. Like, Palpatine tries to be more understanding. And their relationship is easily one of the best and most important parts of the movie. And there's also two other really great examples of how well Palpatine manipulates Anakin. The other is at the beginning, after Obi-Wan and Anakin go to save Palpatine, and Anakin is forced with killing Dooku, and he completely refuses at first. He does not want to do it because he knows it's not the Jedi way, when he says, "I shouldn't." And Palpatine famously says, "Do it." But meme aside, like, that scene, that moment is so freaking crucial, because, it shows that there is enormous amount of conflict within Anakin, because he, wants to kill Dooku because of what Dooku did to him in Episode 2, but at the same time, he knows that, it's not the way of the Jedi to be violent and aggressive, not to be, offensive, but to be defensive, as George Lucas once said. And another fantastic example of Palpatine manipulating Anakin is, of course, in the scene when Anakin, like, cuts off Mace Windu's hand, and, Palpatine finally proclaims him as Darth Vader. That's another super important scene, because, like, the only reason Anakin chooses it is because, deep down he knows that he really has no other choice but to pick Palpatine, because Palpatine is offering him, a solution, offering to help him save Padme from dying, because Palpatine says, or at least implies back in the opera scene, that, if you become a Sith, you'll learn the secret to cheating death, and that's exactly what Anakin needs and wants, because, he really has nothing else to, to go for it. He's left with no other option to turn to, and no one else to turn to except Palpatine, because Palpatine is offering him a chance, So, in that sense, that's one of the main reasons why Anakin goes with Palpatine, because he's sort of his only hope, in a way. Like how, Obi-Wan was Leia's only hope in A New Hope. But yeah, that scene is like super good for that reason. But also, like, immediately after it happens, immediately after Anakin cuts off Mace Windu's hand, and then, like, Palpatine kills Mace Windu, Anakin says, "What have I done?" That moment of realization is super crucial to his arc in this movie as well, because, like, he just didn't really realize the full consequences and impact of what he was going to do until he did it. And at that point, he realizes, there's no turning back. I have to devote my loyalty to this guy, because he's my only chance of saving the woman I love, which is, a perfect example of, the reason why Anakin ultimately turns to the dark side. And it's not really for fear or power or for anger. If you think about it, he really turns out of desperation. Really, that's his main reason and motivation for turning to the dark side, because he's desperate to save Padme from dying, because he doesn't want history to repeat itself. He doesn't want the same thing to happen to her that happened with, his mother in Attack of the Clones, which, by the way, I forgot to mention in my Attack of the Clones review, is easily the best scene in Attack of the Clones, because it's so dramatic, and story-wise, it's important to Anakin's arc, because it's one of the first examples we see of him having a little bit of dark side in him when he slaughters all the Tusken Raiders. And the fact that he failed to keep his promise to save and free his mother, that's one of the many things that leads him down the path to the dark side, as well as being desperate to save Padme. Because again, like I said, he feels as though he has no other option, so that's why he turns. Desperation is the biggest factor in him turning, more so than his fear and anger. And another one of my biggest pros for Revenge of the Sith is Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan, and also Ian McDiarmid as Palpatine. Why? Because they give their best performances of the trilogy in this movie, because both of them have so much more important roles in the story, and much bigger roles. For Obi-Wan, he is important because, like, he has to play sort of the victim next to Anakin. Him losing his best friend, or brother, as he says at the end of this, is important because, like, it kind of leads into the reason why he's in hiding in episode 4, because of his regret for failing Anakin and his vow to protect Luke to sort of make up for failing Anakin. And that sense of, he loses his best friend or brother, so that kind of breaks him and makes him kind of, turn his back on everything, like, he believed in. Like, that part of Obi-Wan's story in this movie is really heartbreaking. And as for Palpatine, he doesn't have to pretend to be somebody else in this movie. He just lets his secret identity loose. He just lets the evil side of him take over, and it's so much fun to, like, see him sort of embrace his dark side, embrace the evil within him, embrace Sidious, rather than Palpatine, because, like, obviously, figuratively they're two different characters, but physically they're the same, just like Anakin/Vader, And of course, Palpatine has some of the most iconic lines and moments, and yes, memes in this movie. Besides "Drit," he also says "unlimited power" and "I am the Sith, this treason." Then he just like, it's so entertaining to see him go full on evil in this movie. but also, story-wise, it's good because, he doesn't have to hide his true self anymore, now that, everybody suspects that he's the Sith and knows it, he just doesn't care. Like in the scene when, Mace Windu and all the other Jedi go in to arrest him, he just talks in his normal Sidious voice, he just doesn't give a shit. And then when he goes full on, into psycho attack mode and, kills all of them, and then Mace, oh, it's just so entertaining. So entertaining. But again, also is a great example of how I said in my Phantom Menace review that he's really a successful manipulator because he's able to play two different personalities perfectly, that you wouldn't necessarily connect the two. When he plays Palpatine, he has to present himself and appear as, a good, selfless politician, but deep down he's this, psychotic evil mastermind. And before I get into my cons, we're going to discuss a few more pros. Firstly, another pro that I have with Revenge of the Sith is the action, which is so much more intense and fun than the action in episodes 1 and 2, because, well, visually it is still kind of video game-esque or video game looking. It's still much more fast-paced and more fun than the action in episodes 1 and 2, and is a little bit more entertaining and enjoyable because you can, see what's happening. The editing and choreography of the action scenes is a little bit better in this movie, and also you care a little bit more about the characters, especially Anakin and Obi-Wan. Like, for example, the opening scene, the Battle of Coruscant, which is done in one long take with so many ships, going at each other and so many explosions going off. That opening shot is gorgeous, even though it's entirely CGI, but it looks gorgeous, and I wish that there were more action scenes like that were well edited and paced in episodes 1 and 2. And another major pro with Revenge of the Sith is the acting, which is mostly good for the main characters. Besides Obi-Wan, Palpatine, and Anakin, Padme is also really good. She gives a much better performance in this movie because, she, again, is one of many victims in this plot because, she loses the man she loves, Anakin, and just doesn't know how to react to it. Especially the scene when Obi-Wan tells her. That scene is so freaking heartbreaking because, it's true, but she denies it because, it's something that she just can't wrap her head around. And also the music that plays in that scene is so freaking dramatic and heartbreaking. In general, that's another pro. Fucking John Williams' score for this movie, holy crap, is it so dramatic, and also feels so much like the music from the original trilogy because it was done by the London Symphony Orchestra, which is one of my cons with the sequel trilogy, that the London Symphony Orchestra didn't do the music for episodes 7, 8, 9. But anyway, John Williams' score for this movie is so freaking good that it might be my favorite musical Star Wars musical score, next to the score for A New Hope. It's that good, and it has so many memorable tracks. But anyway, really quickly, back to Padme. One of the reasons why I think she gives such a better performance in this movie than she did in episodes 1 and 2 is because, she is at the forefront of the plot next to Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Palpatine. She, has a lot more to deal with emotionally and much more to deal with story-wise. Besides the fact that, she's expecting children and the fact that her husband turns evil, which, emotionally wise is obviously takes a huge toll on her. But especially Anakin turning because, she just loses it when it happens, and she just doesn't know how to deal with it because obviously she did not expect that because, she, decided to be with him because, she always thought that he was this selfless, good guy, which, he was, even though he did have dark tendencies before. but like, she just can't cope with it, especially in the scene, when she reunites with him on Mustafar, and he just acts like a totally different person, like so much uh, distant from her, and especially the line when she says, "You're breaking my heart. You're going down a path I can't follow." Yeah, her delivery of that line could have been better, but my God, the line itself and the freaking context of that scene, I just can't help but cry. Seriously, in that moment, because it's just, you feel for her because, like, you're kind of with her in that scene. What's great about that scene, and also pretty much all the emotional scenes in this movie, is because you feel for the characters, because you feel as though you're with them. You feel as though you're going on this journey, or like loss, going through this loss with them. That is one of the many reasons why this movie is so effective, and dare I say, is the best in the prequel trilogy, because I think deep down this was the story that George Lucas wanted to tell from the beginning. In other words, I think the reason why episodes 1 and 2 weren't as good as this one, as 3, is because I think George knew that he would have to get through the first 2 films in order to get to the film that he wanted to do all along, which was the story of Anakin turning and everything, going to shit, and everybody losing, and the Republic being destroyed and the Empire being created. I think deep down that was the story George always wanted to tell. He just didn't do as good with the first 2 parts, because that's not the story he wanted to tell. There's so much effort put into episode 3, and so much, care and detail, because, again, that was the focus of the trilogy, and I think was supposed to be Anakin's fall, and, the creation of the Empire, and, Palpatine ruling and all that. I think, that was supposed to be the focus of the trilogy. It's just that in episodes 1 and 2, the focus kind of got, muddled and, inconsistent. Like, I think one of the reasons why, a lot of fans don't like episodes 1 and 2 as much as 3, including myself, is because, like, there's a sort of lack of focus in episodes 1 and 2, And in fact, that might be the prequel trilogy's biggest problem, lack of focus. Because before the prequel trilogy even, was a thing, George said he wanted it to be all about Anakin's turn and the rise of the Empire, which we only get in this movie. We only get that in Revenge of the Sith. We get some nice foreshadowing and hints of it in episode 1 and 2, granted, but it's really the focus of this movie, and that's why I think that the prequel trilogy's biggest problem is a lack of focus, and that's why I think that Revenge of the Sith was the story that George wanted to tell from the beginning. And to branch off of that, let's get into my cons with Revenge of the Sith. Now, honestly, I actually didn't have as many cons or problems with this movie as I did for episodes 1 and 2, but I have a few. But they're not, like, huge story issues. They're more just, like, tiny nitpicks or moments that I don't think worked as a whole. Like, for example, the fact that there's 5 lightsaber fights in this movie really annoyed me, because, in my opinion, that's just way too many, and also kind of breaks the tradition that, each Star Wars movie has to have at least one lightsaber fight at the end, so that way you're looking forward to it, that way there's some build-up there. But one of the reasons why I hate the fact that there's so many lightsaber fights in this movie is because most of them aren't really good, because, as I said in my review for Phantom Menace, none of them really have any dramatic reason or purpose for why they're going on, and, they're just not as important story-wise as Anakin and Obi-Wan's fight at the end, because that is the best lightsaber fight in this movie, because it has the most dramatic purpose and reason and context for why it's going on. Because it's not about the fight itself, it's about, the characters and their struggle and them essentially turning against each other. It's all about these two best friends or brothers, you know, basically, you know, losing faith in each other, and now they realize, you know, that they're enemies. You know, that, you know, all that super heartbreaking stuff is really the main reason why Obi-Wan and Anakin's fight is, you know, the best lightsaber fight in this movie, and why it's one of the best moments in this movie, and arguably the saga, and also one of the reasons why it's my third favorite lightsaber fight, just under Luke versus Vader in Empire and Luke versus Vader in Jedi. Like, it's my third favorite lightsaber fight for that reason, and is also one of my biggest pros with Revenge of the Sith, because of that dramatic purpose and because of that dramatic and emotional context. And another big con that I have, and probably my only one, story-wise, is the fact that Padme ends up dying at the end of this movie after she gives birth to Luke and Leia. Now, I know you're going to know why this is a con for me, and that's just because it's a major continuity error with Return of the Jedi. Because if you're a Star Wars fan, as you know, there was a scene in Return of the Jedi where Luke asks Leia about her mother and what she remembers about her, and, you know, they talk about their parents, and then Luke reveals to her that, you know, they're siblings. A reason that is a major problem with this movie. You know, the reason why Padme dies is a major problem for me is because it's a major continuity error. Because if what Leia said about her remembering her real mother is true, then there's no frickin' way that she could have remembered Padme, because Padme died literally minutes after Leia and Luke were born. So there's no way in hell that, like, Leia would remember her that young. Like, only a few minutes after being born, her mother dies. There's no way that she could have remembered that. Now, it's possible. It's possible she could have been referring to her foster mother, you know, Bail Organa's wife. But it's heavily implied in that scene that she's referring to her birth mother, you know, to Padme. So there's just logically no way in hell she could have remembered Padme unless Padme had lived and gone into hiding with Leia, which I think should have happened because it would have been more consistent with that scene in Return of the Jedi. But the only explanation I can think of for why Leia remembers her is the Force. That's literally the only reason I can think of for Leia remembering Padme. And that is that through the Force she saw Padme and had some sort of vision of her. Even though I think that that's an excuse, because, you know, never once were we shown that Padme had any connection to the Force. Even though, to be fair, everybody, or every living creature in the Star Wars universe has the Force, aliens and humans. Contrary to popular belief, yes, every living character in the Star Wars universe has the Force, because that's how the Force was explained in the original trilogy. Both Obi-Wan and Yoda said that the Force is an energy field that binds and connects all living things in the galaxy. Keyword living. So in other words, the only characters in the Star Wars universe that can't use the Force are droids because they're not living. So all in all, Revenge of the Sith is easily, in my opinion, the best of the Star Wars prequel trilogy, and personally is my fourth favorite Star Wars movie of all time, because it sets up everything that happens in the original trilogy perfectly. You know, all that foreshadowing and build-up, not just for the original trilogy, but also for the finale and third act of the movie, which is the best part, is also really good. The drama, incredibly effective. The writing, great. Foreshadowing, great. Acting, great all around, mostly for the main characters. Music, epic, especially Battle of the Heroes and Anakin's Dark Deeds, easily two of my favorite tracks in the movie. The action, much more fun and intense than the action in episodes 1 and 2. And again, really the best thing about this movie is that foreshadowing and build-up. especially the ending with Luke and Leia being separated and their themes playing. Beautiful ending with great continuity, and as a whole, you know, makes the movie worth it. You know, that ending makes, you know, Revenge of the Sith as well as the prequel trilogy meaningful. And as a whole, you can't really understand the saga and get the big picture of it without the prequels. You know, so I'm glad that I decided to give the prequels a second chance. I'm glad that I got off the hate bandwagon for them, because the more you watch them and analyze them, the more good things you start to notice, and you know, the more interesting small details that you start to notice, especially with the foreshadowing and build up. And so I will give Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith a freaking good, or an A minus. Alright, see you guys later. Bye.